Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Waynesboro Symphony Orchestra in Waynesboro, Virginia, happy holidays and welcome to this. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Happy holidays and welcome to this live broadcast of our 250th birthday celebration for Ludwig van Beethoven, perhaps the most celebrated composer of all time. I'm Peter Wilson, music director of the Waynesboro Symphony in Waynesboro, Virginia, and your host for this evening's festivities. So on our last performance as a full orchestra, which took place on March 1st of this year, just before the national shutdown that happened just a few weeks later as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and like many performing arts organizations worldwide, we had to cancel the remainder of our season and regroup with regard to how to bring music to the community. This fall, we have been able to pivot to live streaming concerts of small chamber music ensembles, and I encourage you to look at our WSO YouTube channel for links to those performances. As it turned out, this last full orchestra concert on March 1st was an all Beethoven program in celebration of this milestone year marking the great master's 250th birthday. We performed his great Coriolan Overture, his Symphony No. 1, and then on the second half of the concert, we featured this wonderful triple concerto for piano, violin, cello, and orchestra. Well, now that we have finally arrived at Beethoven's actual birthday, which was technically yesterday, today he was baptized 250 years ago, I thought, given our pandemic circumstances, that it would be fun to host a replaying of that performance of the triple concerto from March here tonight on this broadcast, in part as a thank you card of sorts to all our amazing patrons who have been so supportive during these difficult times. But wait, there's more. I am especially thrilled that I was able to round up the amazing soloists from that performance here tonight for a live discussion about Beethoven, this great work, and of course, what went into the performance. So now I am pleased to introduce for the first time together since our performance, pianist Robert Koenig, violinist Ertan Torgul, and cellist Jennifer Kloetzel. We are reunited at last.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hello.
It's great to see you guys. Oh my gosh, did we have cheers?
They're celebrating.
Cheers.
We're celebrating. Happy birthday, Beethoven, right here.
Here. Life-size cardboard cutout.
Wow.
Oh my goodness, look at
That's how
that.
you know you're a real Beethoven lover, you know. He's taking notes, by the way.
He is taking notes. He's taking notes on this whole thing, making sure that he quizzes us later.
And is that the score for the triple concerto behind you, Ertan?
Well, I couldn't find my part because someone borrowed the piano part. I think I have the clavier trios back there, just kind of representing. Oh, good. The scores abound. Everybody has it.
Yeah, I've got my score
Oh,
here.
that's nice. That's a nice score.
If I have to, refer to anything in particular, we'll get there. So what I love about this is that we actually didn't get to conduct a pre-concert lecture or even a post-concert interview in front of our audience. So I thought this was like really a perfect way to kind of revisit the performance, but also to allow our viewers the opportunity to ask questions of each of you regarding the work that went into preparing this. And, so just kind of give everybody a chance to kind of join in on this, because we didn't have a chance to do that during the performance back in March. So with that in mind, I encourage everyone who's watching to post your questions in the comment section of the YouTube video here, and our staff here is going to be feeding those to me. So as we go, this should be good. Okay, so before we get into all of that, and we're going to have the performance coming up soon, I thought we could discuss a little bit about each of you so that our audience could learn a little bit more. You know, they got to read the bios in their programs and things like that. So I know that all three of you are colleagues at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I'm going to start with Bob. Bob, you are, I understand, the chairman of the music division there at UC Santa Barbara, and you're the head of collaborative piano, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you've just had an unbelievable career of performing with just countless amazing artists, not the least of which are the two other people here. But I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And you know, one of the things I was curious about for you is that with your extensive performing and recording career all over the world, you actually, interestingly enough, probably have had uh, not so many performances with orchestra. Am I right in saying that?
That's exactly right. This performance, I think it's the second time that I've actually played the triple concerto. And aside from that, you know, I work as a collaborative pianist, and so I'm playing with cellists and singers and violinists. But it's very rare for me to get to play with orchestra. So this was an incredibly special concert, especially since it was really essentially my last concert before the pandemic shut everything down. So.
Right, right. So how is that different? Like between, you know, you're preparing concerts with various artists. I'm sure that you're used to switching gears all the time with different, you know, personalities and perhaps concert egos and whatever else that you have to deal with in that, and obviously the travel and everything. But how is that different from playing with an orchestra in this case?
Well, you know, I actually don't think it is that much different. I mean, it's, you know, being a collaborative pianist and a chamber musician, when you play with orchestra, you still have to have the tuners on, you know, listening and be aware of everything that's going on around you. So it's sort of similar.
That's great. That's cool.
Then, of
Well,
course,
and obviously in this particular concerto, it's been said that it really is just a glorified piano trio in so many ways. It's not a typical concerto, right? Because a normal concerto, the soloists would be, the way the writing is, it would be kind of a conversation with the orchestra itself, back and forth. And in this case, it was really the three of you soloists, and the orchestra is really just accompanying you in this particular concerto.
right. So it is essentially just like playing a piano trio, except the added thing, of course, is you have to follow the maestro and get used to with the conductor.
Right. So speaking of the pandemic, as you said, I was curious, you know, what have you been doing since that performance? What, you know, what got you through you know, the long shutdown that we had, and obviously things have been coming back. I know that your university is open, but you're probably doing things mostly online, I would think. But tell us about what you did during the pandemic, during the shutdown, and then what like projects you have coming up.
Sure. You know, it was really difficult at first when all the concerts started getting canceled, of course. And so, you know, because we're all used to being very active and traveling and playing in various different situations. The one thing that I was fortunate with that kept me artistically and musically sort of motivated was the fact that I'm the chair of the department here. And so we had to pivot completely into a remote teaching situation. And you can imagine the challenges of that when you are an ensemble-based music department, you know, with our orchestra, with our choirs, with our chamber music. Many of our students weren't even in the country. I mean, they chose to stay home. And so we had faculty that were trying to teach Zoom lessons to students in China. And so with the time difference, it was a big challenge. But, you know, we have incredibly resilient students. Our faculty has just been amazing, all of our staff, and we'll get through it.
That's great. That's great. Do you have any projects coming up that you're preparing for?
Well, you know, what's sort of exciting, I was just telling Jennifer the other day that things are starting to slowly get booked again for the 21-22 season. I think now that we know the vaccine is on its way, people are starting to emerge. And so that's really encouraging.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so we'll move on to our violinist, Airton Torgel. Are you coming to us from Texas?
I'm in Fort Worth, Texas. Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yes.
So obviously you're a violin professor there at UC Santa Barbara, but are you also teaching in Texas?
I am actually teaching also at the University of Houston, Moore's School of Music as well. Yeah, that just started this year, and it's pretty exciting. You know, it's just kind of two different schools, two different
Right.
sets of things. Yeah, I was
Right.
grading the students today, for example. Had no
Wow.
idea what I was doing for a while there, so it's interesting.
So your solo career I mean, your performing career has been pretty extensive. You've been a concertmaster with a whole bunch of different orchestras, guest concertmaster, but you're also a violinist with the Soli Chamber Ensemble. Let's talk about your what groups you're working with now and.
Correct. Yeah, Soli is a contemporary chamber ensemble. So we do, well, I always say 20th and 21st century, but I think I'm just gonna have to change basically 21st century. When we cross over to below 2000s, we kind of start looking at each other. God, this piece is really old, you know. So it's a really, really cutting edge ensemble, and I've been with the group for 27 years, 25 years. It's been around 27 years, so it's pretty exciting. Yeah, we've actually did a concert in October, a socially distanced one. So that was our first one back. It was a little strange. We're all sitting far apart, and all of this, and playing this very difficult repertoire very far away from each other. So it was really kind of exciting. Yeah, it's a great group.
That's great. So related to your soloing on this triple concerto, I'm just imagining you as playing in these ensembles and then having to switch gears as a soloist. I would imagine you've probably played in the orchestra even as concertmaster for the triple probably before. Am I right in saying that?
That's correct.
So like were there any challenges, or what was different this time? I should ask if you've played the solo part before playing it with Waynesboro.
I worked on the solo part, and I was about to perform it with three people. Actually, cellists from the orchestra in San Antonio Symphony, and a guest artist, guest pianist. And it was many, many years ago. And what happened is the concert had to be canceled. And after all the work that went into it, San Antonio Symphony was having some issues with financial issues, and so they had to cancel a whole bunch of concerts. So I never got to perform it. This was my first one as a soloist, and it's so special. And I couldn't have asked for a better conductor, better colleagues, and better orchestra. Seriously, it just made my day.
The check's in the mail. Okay, so what have you been doing? When the shutdown happened, what kept you busy? I know you've got a wonderful family there that you probably were holed up with, and that's great too.
It was fantastic because Bob, Jennifer, and I are three of us, and you would understand this, Peter. So we were traveling so much. We really were hardly home sometimes, and whether it was international or national or just traveling to teach even. So it was kind of, and I feel guilty saying this, but I have to say it, it was kind of a nice little respite in a way from that life. And I've been hearing this a lot from big soloists as well. Everybody's just kind of saying it was interesting to slow down a little bit and just kind of be in one place and reassess things. So that's what I did. But the teaching continued, which was a true blessing for all of us. I think that we were able to still reach our students and help them through their degrees and their pieces and all that kind of stuff. But also, Jennifer and I have a quartet that we work with, string quartet, and we had a lot of projects that came up. We did a lot of distanced recordings, and I've learned how to use Final Cut Pro and the DAWs for sound recording, and purchasing mics and figuring those things out. So it was kind of an exciting time in its own right, I guess. And I really believe in making lemonade out of lemons. So just really did as much as possible to fill the time and also utilize the time in a positive way.
That's great. That's great. I like how you put that too about having to reassess things, because it gave us all time to kind of realize what's important, how much we love to perform. As busy as our schedules may have been, I know that all of us were really yearning to get back in and play with colleagues. It's been that part has been kind of tough. So
yes.
Well, that's great. Okay, so now to our beautiful cellist Jennifer Kloetzel, who is also at UC Santa Barbara. Jennifer, you are the head of the strings, the string faculty there.
These are my two bosses, by the way.
That's right. That's right. You better behave.
The big boss, and then and then head of strings boss. I love it.
Right.
I
That's
do
right.
whatever they say,
That's
basically.
right.
You know.
So and Jennifer, but you before you went to UC Santa Barbara, you spent 20 years as the founding cellist of the Cypress String Quartet, which would travel the world, and you did so many recordings. Um, how how is this different for you in terms of now? I should tell our audience, of course, they many of them already know we've had you many times perform with the Waynesboro Symphony. We love having you. So, and this was no exception, of course, bringing your colleagues with you, of course, this time. But how was it to transition from being in that string quartet for so many years and then moving on to be a professor, but also a soloist? Because you've had a pretty active solo career now since then as well.
Right. Well, I mean, the 20 years was amazing. I learned so much. I mean, from years of touring and recording and playing, and that was a full-time job. I really had very little time to do anything aside, um, playing in the string quartet. That was our full-time job. Occasionally, I came and soloed with Waynesboro, but I wasn't really ever able to focus on all that solo music that I loved so much. And so I was once I changed, or the quartet disbanded, and I started teaching, and then I had to learn how to divide my time between the teaching and then figuring out the solo or the other chamber.
Awesome. So what now? What have you been doing since the shutdown? What is
Well,
a lot of solo chamber, a lot solo cello music you can be playing, of course, just as there is for violin, I know.
right. Actually, it's interesting. I had a lot of concerts canceled as we all did, and that was upsetting for a little while. And I was trying to figure out what to do or how to fill my time. Actually, one of the things that kept me going was Bob and I have actually been working on a project for the last year where we recorded all the music that Beethoven wrote for piano and cello. There are 9 pieces. And we had completed 6 of those pieces before the shutdown, and we were scheduled to finish that recording up at Skywalker Ranch. Um, we were scheduled to do that in June, and it got canceled because things were closed down. So we were able to go in and mask and distance in September and finish that project. And that will be released on the AB label in uh, sometime next summer, I think. So, and so that's one project. That's exciting. Ertan already mentioned the quartet projects we've been working on. We're in the middle of another project for the quartet that's called the Interpretive of Fate project. It's all about music written about what 2020 means to composers. So that's coming up soon. And then there's the teaching, and I've also been commissioning a lot of programs for you.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So as we prepare for the replay here of our March 1st performance, I thought it would be fun to sort of kind of revisit this work and talk about it just a little bit before we get into the performance recording. So this triple concerto was composed in 1803, published in 1804. It actually didn't get played for several years. And what I love to do when I'm diving into a piece like this that's new for me, certainly in terms of conducting, I like to look at like what's been going on in the world at the time that the piece was written. So when I was doing my research at the time, I discovered kind of interesting things like Emerson was born in 1803, a guy by the name of Christian Doppler, who was famous for discovering what he called the Doppler effect. You remember? He was born in 1803. And of course, I would be in big trouble with my musicologist father if I didn't mention the birth of his favorite composer, Hector Berlioz,
Oh,
in 1803. Let's see, what else here? Ohio was admitted to the Union in 1803. The Louisiana Purchase was made in April of 1803. And of course, the Napoleonic Wars began in 1803. And of course, there's this infamous connection with Beethoven as he was writing his Third Symphony, which, by the way, was the opus number just before the triple. The triple was opus 56, and his Eroica Symphony was opus 55, which he started also in 1803. And he didn't really finish it until 1805. So it seems to me that he may have written the triple in the middle of this and then went back to the symphony, which is fascinating to me because it's such a monumental work. It was the longest symphony in history up to that point. And of course, he was such a fan of Napoleon, actually many don't know this, but the title of this symphony was To Be Bonaparte. And then, of course, Napoleon named himself emperor, and that infuriated Beethoven. And so after it was about to be published later on, he scratched out Napoleon's name in the front of the score, and you can even see that if you can look online, and there's actually a hole in the manuscript, right? And so he called it the Eroica, as the memory of a great man, basically, is this heroic symphony. But this is appropriate because it's during the triple was written during this heroic period. Other pieces, let's see, what came right after it? The Appassionata piano sonata, and I also saw that the Waldstein was published in 1803. So there's just a really heavy period of writing. And the Jennifer, you would know this, the Razumovsky quartets came very soon after this as well, right?
And the fourth piano concerto, I think, is opus 58. So it's a really rich time period for Beethoven.
Right.
When isn't, right? But
right. Well, and it's interesting too, because as concertos go, a triple concerto like this is fairly uncommon, I would say. And it's the only concerto that Beethoven wrote for more than one player. We know of a lot of double concertos like by Brahms and others, but this is, or Mozart, for example, with the Sinfonia Concertante. But for three instruments, it's fairly rare. But even for Beethoven, it was super rare, right? For him to write for multiple instruments.
Yeah, he apparently wrote to his publisher and said this is something really new. I think it's great. He was always trying to.
Okay, so I have to ask this question. There is a sort of a famous joke that goes along with this piece, which is that the level of difficulty with each of the parts suggests that you give let me get this right, you would give if you had a performance to give, you would give the piano part a week in advance to the soloist and the violin part a month in advance to the soloist, but the cello part needs to get to the soloist a year in advance. Am I close in saying that the difficulty here is?
It is so true. Oh my God, it's crazy.
It's no secret that the cello part is the story.
That is the joke, of course. But I mean, if you think about it, Beethoven himself, he wasn't sure how to make the cello a solo instrument. I think partly because of the players at the time, partly of the expectations of what cellists did at that time. They weren't playing so high, and the lower tones would get lost in an orchestra. Part of the reason this part is considered complex or a little more difficult is it's quite high for the cello, and he's doing that purposefully to get the sound out. So,
well, and Beethoven never wrote a cello concerto.
Never did. This is our cello concerto. Thank you, Beethoven.
That's right.
Which is a total shame, right? I mean, would have been an amazing piece. But this really is quite the cello part, I must say. I mean, Jennifer, do you agree that maybe that's okay? That it takes the place of a concerto? I don't know.
I'll take it. And we can't complain. I mean, he wrote 5 cello sonatas, a version of the horn sonata for cello, and then 3 sets of variations. So I am not complaining about Beethoven's. Mozart, we didn't have any of that. So.
True.
Well, and as I understand it, there's some speculation here, but we think that maybe Beethoven was writing this actually for one of his students, one of his piano students, who he was training, and so there may have been. And for that student to play with 2, master musicians on violin and cello, so it may be that there was a little, method to that madness, if you will.
And our audience will see this when they see us performing. But one of the big challenges here is placement, just getting these 3 instruments set up inside of an orchestra, and so everybody will see how squished in we all are.
Well, it didn't didn't help that we didn't have a stage. We're performing in a church. We'll tell the people that haven't heard this performance yet, because yeah, we have a tough time even with one soloist. We have a tough time squeezing things in with the podium and where the soloist is going to stand, because we don't have we don't have the luxury of a downstage area. There's like a pew right there, right? So and then we have these little cubicles in the back where chorus members might be, that we put the brass and the double basses sometimes, and things are just scattered. So we've got 3 soloists and a grand piano to deal with. Right? So you'll see, people will see in this performance with the video that I'm pretty much hidden for most of the time. I'm behind the piano lid, and that was particularly difficult because of course Jennifer having the most involved part, shall we say, and she's opening these movements, right? She's always starting, and so I wasn't able to see her, so we were really going on some autopilot. That offered some challenges, certainly in rehearsal, and we were feeling each other's emotions during all of that. I could see Bob, and if I turned a little bit, I could see Ertan, and we were telegraphing some things during that period of time as well, of course. But yeah,
little secret movements.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right. But Jennifer is such a pro. I mean, she didn't really need any of it, honestly. I mean, she knows the score backwards and forwards, so it was kind of a futile attempt on my part, at least. Give her anything.
I think the 3 of us know each other so well, and we know each other's playing so well, just from having worked together for a long time now, that it's you trust each other that it's going to work.
Well, it was just a thrill for me, and with that, let's move to the performance. We'll see the 3 of you afterwards with big applause and many questions from our audience. Thank you so much, all 3 of you, for joining the Waynesboro Symphony for the performances and for tonight's replay. It's so great to have you here. And so without further delay, here is, ladies and gentlemen, Beethoven's Triple Concerto. Thank you. Bravo!
Woohoo! Cheers,
Bravo!
everybody. That was fun.
Happy birthday, Beethoven. That was for you, buddy. Drink up.
Wow, what amazing memories.
I know, right? You guys rock. You're all rock stars. It's such a pleasure to work with you, and I hope we can do it again sometime. Wow.
You know what I was thinking about while I was watching that again was just how we managed to get rehearsals in, because that's a challenge too, you know, because all three of us live in different cities, of course. And so we'd finally find a day when all three of us would be on campus together. But then, of course, all of us are teaching all day long. So we couldn't even rehearse till usually 8 p.m. at night. And then the best part was that we would always end up at the local bowling alley called Zorro's, having comfort food and stiff drinks. So that
Recovery time.
Absolutely. Oh my God, that was fun.
I was going to ask about that, Bob. I was going to ask how you guys got together, and as we said before, that this concerto is mostly a piano trio. That probably helped in so many ways. You didn't have to rely on the orchestra to be feeding you. It kind of was easy to put that together, I would think.
Right. And I think, you know, we were able to also rehearse two of us at one time, and when the third one couldn't be there, and that's all that's valuable too. So.
Yeah, Jennifer and I did a lot of stuff together, you know, setting lengths and, you know, what we wanted to do with stuff. And then when Bob joined us, you know, it was so much easier, of course. I mean, you know, in the professional world, that's what one has to do these days. You know, you just kind of put it together remotely, you know, not even during the pandemic. I mean, it just happens.
Right. Yeah, there's that famous part, yada da dee da 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 dee da 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 da, the triplets, right? The infamous triplets that you guys have to match up. So
Oh, that was fun. But, you know, Jennifer's so easy to play with, that, you know, that was never a problem. I was listening to it just kind of like cringing on some of the notes that I played, but really overall it was so easy. All we had to do was just how short it was going to be. What did we want? And that was it. Done.
And I'm sure all, you know, our audience now can see that the cello part really does rule the piece.
It does. My God. I mean, those high register things that he puts for the cello, it's incredible. Incredible writing.
Legendary in our world.
legendary.
It is legendary.
Legend is legendary. Okay, so we'll get to some of the questions here. There have been a couple rolling in here. The first one's for me. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, people. Someone asked how how did I come to choose this piece to program? It's always a great question. So I wanted to do a big Beethoven tribute concert, and it was all about the timing of that, and thank goodness I didn't program it for April because we would have been clearly canceled, right? Because we had talked about that, closing the season with a big Beethoven tribute. Turned out we had voted to end the concert season with Mahler 5, so that was going to be our next thing that we were going to do after the Beethoven. But we've been going through all the Beethoven symphonies in the Waynesboro Symphony, and we hadn't done Beethoven 1 yet. We had done most of the other symphonies. We still haven't done 2 and 4, which are both great, but we hadn't done 1, and I thought that's a great symphony to put on a first half with an overture. And of course, I've always wanted to do this triple concerto. We've always wanted to have Jennifer Kloetzel back, of course, and she was telling me about all of these amazing colleagues that she has. And so we thought, let's wrap this up in a nice bow. And of course, Jennifer had mentioned that she's been working on Beethoven already with Bob at Skywalker Ranch and recording these. Hopefully these albums will be coming out soon. Can't wait for that. And with Airton, it just sounded like a perfect trio. So it made all the sense in the world to program this. And of course, it needed to be the second half. I mean, there's no question about that we wanted to do that. Also want to mention that you guys did play an encore, one of my absolute all-time favorite piano trios. And this is the beauty of it being a piano trio. There's so much literature for piano trio itself, right? So you both picked, I think it was the D minor Mendelssohn trio, and it was the slow movement. and I think that we can put a link up to that. That's up on YouTube as well. So that's just a phenomenal encore that we can put up there. Okay, so the next question that came in: are there any other pieces that we know of for this configuration of solo, piano, cello, violin, and orchestra? And what's interesting is I had done a search, years ago. You can actually type this into Wikipedia. You can say list compositions for this thing. Here we go. So I think nobody as famous in terms of the prior to the 20th century too much like a Beethoven that had written a triple. I think of Vivaldi, who had done multiple instruments. There's like the famous one for 4 violins and concertos like that. But for this particular configuration, there are about 30 concertos, believe it or not, or concert works, concertinas, things like that for this configuration and orchestra. Most of them are the 20th and 21st centuries. There's actually one that was just written a couple of years ago, and I would imagine that there's probably a pairing going on here. If I can speculate, my guess is that they have the soloists coming in to do the Beethoven, and then they decide to do a world premiere with something else. That's usually how that kind of thing works. But Jennifer, you showed a list. Tell us what you discovered.
Well, actually, the most famous one I know of is by Martinu, and that's from the 1930s. But it's hardly done, and it's actually for piano trio and string orchestra, like chamber orchestra. And Emmanuel Moore, another one, he wrote a great cello concerto too. But then it's a lot of contemporary composers. One's actually pretty well-known, very well-known ones, like Nico Muhly and Lara Auerbach and Ellen Taft-Zwillig. Among others. I mean, it's a lot. At 30, we mostly hear this one. So,
yeah, the one that I had to laugh at was I saw the Zwillig on there as well, and I just remembered from my days doing my master's degree up at Catholic University that we had to do this bibliography class, and I was assigned the last 3 letters of the Grove Dictionary. And to me, Zwillig's claim to fame is she is the final entry in the Grove Dictionary of all, whatever it is now, 26 volumes or something like that. And I had come up with this. We had to give a presentation on that, so that was why I remember that name. But
and a dang good composer.
Yes,
there you go.
And I guess now it's up to us to keep it alive and keep commissioning young up and coming composers.
Absolutely.
So we got a question from England, folks, and here it is. I find the triple concerto fascinating because it's like a sketchbook of ideas that Beethoven later developed further into other works, such as the Emperor Concerto, that's of course for piano, and of course the Ninth Symphony. What parts of the concerto remind you of other works by Beethoven? Anything pop out to you guys?
I've got one. Actually, since he was writing these as sort of similar in time to the Razumovsky quartets, and since that's something I've spent a lot of time in and recorded those as well. 59 number 1 has a really large cello part, and some of the material in this, especially in the first movement, reminds me of that same key as well. So, yeah.
I sort of hear, I hear certainly the first piano concerto and the Waldstein Sonata. Maybe it's because they're all 3 of these pieces are in C major, and C major is such a joyous, happy key, and that rings true here in the triple concerto. The slow movement of the triple, I can hear the second movement of the famous Pathétique Sonata.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Which is interesting because it's not either the Waldstein or the Appassionato, which are closer to the period of time that he was writing this triple. There was another quote. I was telling Jennifer the other day, there was another quote that I remember hearing, and I was just looking in the score to try to find it from another of his works, and I can't remember what it is, but I'll have to dig that up. But yes, C major, the people's key, as we say.
That's right.
It's a very happy key, and it's great for cello.
Very happy.
Yeah.
Very joyful key. So let's talk about, as people might be getting some more questions in, talk about what you guys felt the challenges were from from an interpretive perspective. I guess we talked about the issues of trying to find time to rehearse and things like that. But as you were putting this together, what did you guys find was most challenging or exciting about about your experience?
For me, it's interesting. There are a lot of incredible performers out there perform this piece, and of course a lot of Beethoven. Whether it's the violin concerto, piano sonatas, or concertos, and all of that. I think that the three of us, maybe without even discussing it, honestly, wanted to stay a little sort of more on the classical side, possibly. It's interesting because I'm always go for the romantic. Really try much more sort of lugubrious type of playing, and see Jennifer's laughing. Jennifer's always like, "Come on, speed up, damn it!"
Actually, I was thinking of your one slide in there. You go, damn.
Well, that was the only one. That was the only one. But I asked permission for that, the little gypsy section. I said, you guys, I really want to do this. And I actually do that a lot more, but in this concert I did a lot less somehow. I don't know how that ended up. But that was one of the things, and I think that you sometimes run a risk a little bit. I think going that route, because it's a little bit simpler, it's a little bit purer, and if things are not good, that may not sound as exciting as like some other performance where there's a lot of bells and whistles going on. But I really enjoyed that with these guys. I think that was really sort of was one of those learning experiences or holding myself back type of experiences that is so useful, going forward. That's what I remember really vividly for myself. But we never discussed it. We never actually said we're going to stay classical or whatever. It's interesting.
It's interesting you bring that up, because there are some performers out there that we all know of who learn something a certain way. They get their interpretation prepared, and then they want to play it exactly the same way every time. And I get the sense from the three of you that you're far more organic in performance. You have your set ways. It's not like you go flying off the reservation, but you want there to be something true and authentic and organic in the performance. Am I right in saying that?
I find that when I'm performing, often I'm trying to let the music kind of come through me, right there. That's the organic process for me. I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about that piece of music. And I really think that what we have, these as one of my composer friends calls them, dots on the page. We've got these dots on the page that we're trying to bring to life and tell a story with, but it's not my story, it's the composer's story, and it's through my eyes and my emotions. But at the same time, if I try to get to that map, if I try to follow the map to the buried treasure as closely as I can, knowing what I know about Beethoven, 1803 he's writing this is not the later Beethoven as he's really starting to rip open his soul. That's what my job, I feel like, is to do that. And with each composer I'm really seeking that.
Right. And if I could just add, I also think that for the three of us, Beethoven is just such a part of our musical lives. It has been for all of our lives. And so, I think back when I was a young pianist, starting at the age of 5 or 6, and one of the first pieces a young pianist encounters is Fur-Elise, the most famous Beethoven piece ever, right? And so I couldn't be dragged away from that piece. And my teachers were getting mad all the time. And I'm sure my family who are tuned in tonight are cringing at that memory of just hearing Fur-Elise over and over and over again. But, Beethoven's been such a part of all of our musical journey that we've all come to a certain sensibility of how to treat it, I think.
Absolutely.
But in this piece in particular, though, one of the things that was fascinating me when I was doing my research on it and reading as many program notes as I could find is almost every one of them pointed out that it's not played very often. And one of the reasons they cite is that, let's put it this way, it's not a particularly popular work. And one of the reasons that they cite is poor performances, that it's really hard to find three people who match up, because chemistry is everything in a performance like this. and matching ideas and matching levels of playing. And I have to say that the three of you are just were absolutely masterful in this. It was so inspiring for me on the podium, and I know that the orchestra was thrilled to have the three of you there. And I have to say, I mean, these performances were just stunning.
I mean, speaking of the orchestra, how great did they sound?
They sound
I
amazing.
mean, that was spectacular.
Oh,
Funny enough, I hadn't heard this performance in a long time. I might have listened to parts of it when you guys sent the recording, in April or something like that. But I don't think I ever sat down and listened to the performance before. And so I didn't really notice how great the orchestra did and it sounded. And of course, you, Peter, I mean, as the boss man, really have done incredible job with this orchestra. And I remember distinctly and very clearly that the three of us had an absolute blast with the orchestra. I mean, like rehearsal process and of course the performances and all that kind of stuff. That was a great memory.
well, it was great having you guys, and this was, this orchestra is such family to me. They're just a great group of musicians, and they're so gracious when we have soloists come in. I think that's part of the reason Jennifer likes coming back, is she just knows feels the big hug, from the orchestra. One thing I want to point out to our audience, especially those that are not from the Waynesboro or Stanton, Virginia area who get to hear this orchestra, is that we gave two performances. And this is one of the things that I love about conducting the Waynesboro Symphony, is that not only do we get two opportunities to play these concerts, which is pretty rare for community orchestras. Most give one performance and that's it. But we also play each concert in a different venue. So I wanted to talk to you both, the three, about that as well, because I wanted to, we had both of these concerts. One was in Stanton, which was on February 29th. We're in a leap year, right? And that was the Saturday night performance. So we have everything mixed up, right? We're in two different locations, two different towns, two different churches with completely different acoustics and setups, or audiences completely different. One's at night, one's during the day, and that sort of thing. How did that affect your performances, or how you pace yourselves? Because one was on Saturday night, the next was Sunday afternoon.
That's a
I
good
remember,
question.
I remember distinctly that the second performance, it was freezing backstage. Remember the boiler went out in the church and there was no heat, right? So
Oh my gosh, that's right.
that was a big challenge. The other challenge for the second concert was I felt more constrained with the space. I felt we were much closer to each other, and so maybe a little claustrophobic for me. But
One of the things that I remember, and every time I played there, is between the two uh, spaces, your people have to move around depending on where they fit. So something I'm used to, I'll hear from one place behind me. I mean, I'm faced away from the orchestra, right? I'll hear it in one space one night, and then the next afternoon in a different. It's coming from a different side, and so that throws you a little bit, but also not. I mean, I know what I'm expecting to hear, so I'm listening for that.
And it's so funny, Jennifer and I are I mean, orchestral background too, but Jennifer had 20 years of playing in very different halls for the same concert program, and so you really, like, from my quartet background too, you really go into halls, and you really do create your own environment. It takes it takes a while sometimes, and sometimes it's quicker, but you create that. So that usually I try not to dwell on too much, but it is a thing. You have to kind of get used to it. I'm a big soloist who travel every week to some other concert hall. I mean, they're very lucky, of course. They play in great concert halls all the time, right? But it's still a tactile feeling, how you play something. And Bob, I'm sure, will back that up to us for piano. And for you guys, we're carrying our instruments. You actually have the instrument there that you have to play.
But I felt very fortunate with these two concerts in particular, because I thought I had good pianos for both concerts in both of those spaces.
Absolutely.
Right. I hadn't even thought of that. You were playing on two completely different instruments each night, so you couldn't get used to one too much more than the other. Well, I have to say that, I mean, I loved the things that were different, I mean, and as a conductor, that's, it can be terrifying if you're playing with a person that you just have no idea how to read the signals, right? But for you guys, it was just so easy, and I loved what you did this, on the second performance, which is the one we just heard, the second performance. Um, you, Airton, you played your little gypsy moment a little differently, both times, So, and I had to catch that, and that made it really fun for me.
But do you remember the dress rehearsal? I just went so overboard. The orchestra was like, "Oh, come on!
Like, hey,
We're like, really?
Really, you're gonna do that?"
I think something about being a professional musician is what you, since we are touring a lot, part of what dress rehearsals are for are getting used to where the space you're playing in. You're not learning your part anymore. You're not really figuring how it all fits together. That has to be done before you get there for the dress rehearsal. And then the dress rehearsal is about, okay, what's the space like? How do I need to push sound out to get to the back of the hall or not? How do I connect with the orchestra? Where's the concertmaster? Where's, how can I see the conductor or not? All that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. So we had one question come in, and the person that asks this question says that perhaps this is a dumb question, so we're just going to set it up that way. But they ask that for a non-music person, could you describe what you might change in this piece if you had to change anything? I mean, far be it from us to presume that we can write better than Beethoven, but is there anything from a technical perspective, or do you want to hear more piano? Do you? It's like,
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know.
I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, yeah, I mean everything's really put together so beautifully, and yes, the roles are really cello, violin, piano in the sense that the way it sort of works out, the way he wrote it, and I mean, as professionals, we just have to voice things a certain way. What's important, what's less important, maybe at a certain moment or whatever. But you really wouldn't change anything. But I did see a question on there about romanticism versus classicism, as far as what you would do, like what would be romantic compared to. To that, I would say, since I sort of brought that whole thing up, taking maybe taking more liberties in a way that might not have been as fitting for say the time period or Beethoven per se, and we all, of course, have emotions that we're trying to portray through this music. In this case, of course, the three of us doing it together. And I think what romantic would be, that if we really sort of stretched more, or took more time here or less time there and pushed it more, or did more slides, or the more romantic type of sort of vibratos and things like that. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can romanticize this, and I don't mind hearing those recordings. I mean, there are some fantastic recordings that are very romantic out there. But it's just, in our case, it just happened so organically this way that we sort of kind of went that way, and that was kind of the more fascinating part of the whole thing.
right. When you get into kind of modernizing the music, if you will, what I think of is elements of like Toscanini, when he would add certain brass to Beethoven symphony. So just to answer the viewer's question, in that sense, we could certainly have reorchestrated things in the orchestra itself, except that in this particular case with this concerto, there's such a depth in the solo parts already that short of adding a saxophone to that, I mean, there's already a lot of depth there. I think we didn't, you don't want to interrupt any of that with trying to add something in the orchestra itself. But did Bob or Jennifer, did you have something else to add to that?
I think of it more. I mean, there's something about sound, of course, a romantic sound, which is sort of a thicker, more chocolate pudding kind of sound, if you will. Something that's a little heavier, more vibrato, more slides, and more freedom taken in timing, which I think Airton was kind of alluding to there. But so I like to when people ask me about this, I talk about most people know Chopin. So if you think about like Chopin's piano music, and you'll see this thing that's like dum, and it all has to fit into one beat, and it's like 12 different notes that have to fit in somehow, and then you have to meet everybody at the next beat. It's like almost like great jazz musicians. I'll meet you at the downbeat. All this stuff can go in there. Whereas with Beethoven, especially in this piece, in this time period, there are eighth notes that are often going through like the orchestral part, and to me, that sort of defines a more classical style, because it kind of puts a set on what the rhythm should be, or how it should feel. The regularity of that is partly what makes it a little more classical to me.
Right, kind of Mozartian in a way, where you have this sort of ostinato thing that binds you to the flow, and you can always manipulate it, of course, but
Sure.
you know.
Sure, but there's something very elegant about that, and if you can manipulate it just so, it's fine. Whereas I would say in Chopin or Schumann or something, you can really stretch that beat a little more and make it work, I think.
And if I could just add, from a pianist's perspective, a real technical way that we could answer that question is that we have the pedal, and and I'm sure the viewers notice I'm hardly using any pedal in the triple concerto, because I want everything clarity and crispness and stuff. But if I was going to choose to want to play it more romantically, I would probably make other choices. Yep.
Absolutely.
That's a great point, Bob, and it made me think of this question. Given that you were playing on two different instruments and in those two different halls that had very different acoustics, did you find yourself using less pedal on the Sunday performance because the church was, I always consider that church to be much more live. You're playing, you're not playing on carpeting like you are in Stanton. Did that affect your performance at all?
Not really, but I think in general, whenever you're performing in a church, churches are almost always going to be very wet and live sounding. So I think for both performances, I was even using less of the pedal than I probably would have.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so one of the questions here as we wind down here is, do any of these musicians have any pieces on their bucket list that they haven't performed yet? Well, Bob has a whole bunch of pieces for piano and orchestra that he hasn't covered yet. So we'll have to dive into that list at some point. Let's start. But yeah. So each of you, let's start with Bob. Is there any works? It doesn't have to be with orchestra though. Any works that you haven't performed that you've always wanted to that you haven't before?
I've got such a wide, eclectic taste in music. I would like to perform Bohemian Rhapsody.
Well, there you go.
It doesn't have to be classical. We have a wealth of incredible music and genres.
So if I were to arrange that for this configuration with orchestra, then we might have something there. Okay.
We're there.
We're there.
I am on that. One of my favorite pieces, I must say. Pieces. I sound like such a geek.
I know, right? Airton, any bucket list pieces you haven't done yet?
Well, I have a lot of things. I've soloed with orchestras on and off, but that hasn't been the major part of my career. Concentrating a lot on chamber music and stuff. So there are some concertos I would love to play. I actually covered one of them some years back, the Korngold's violin concerto, which I got to play with the San Antonio Symphony Orchestra. Was fantastic, and it was exactly. Pop, 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 pop. But I will say that what I would love to do, honestly, is, which I've performed before, is the Brahms double concerto with Jennifer Kloetzel. I don't know if you guys know Jennifer Kloetzel, the famous cellist.
Famous cellist, yes.
It would be my pleasure, Airton.
And I'll rehearse it with you. We'll play the concerto reduction.
There you go. You guys can even do it. You could do it in a recital without the orchestra.
That's a good idea, isn't it?
There's a good idea. And I'll just stand there and just wave my arms in no particular pattern.
Anytime. You're welcome anytime.
Okay, Jennifer, you're up. What bucket list pieces?
my list is way too long because actually, just when I've done one, I want to do it again, right, multiple times. But I mean, everything from Saint-Saëns and both 1 and 2, and Shostakovich, which I did one with Waynesboro, but I want to do two, and I like Barber, and I like actually the Gulda cello concerto. Although you need a jazz band for that too, because that has a jazz band and like wind ensemble.
That's a fun piece.
That's a great piece. And actually, I'm really interested in commissioning new works for all kinds of configurations with orchestra. And one of the things that got canceled during this pandemic time was a double concerto premiere I was supposed to do with our other colleague at UCSB, Jonathan Marshall, the viola professor, a double concerto for cello and viola by Joel Friedman, where we actually have to use pedals and electrifier instruments and stuff too. So I have a pretty eclectic mix too. Maybe not quite as crazy as Bob's there, but
I don't know, with the electrified instruments there, I'm hearing Bohemian Rhapsody as an encore, bringing in special guest artist Robert Koenig.
there we
Maybe.
go.
Just
Hey, wait a minute. What about the Mercury sound, baby?
Mercury. You sing, don't you, Ertan? You're a singer, right?
Singing.
Well, no, but I can. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a related question, so somewhat related, that I've had people ask before, which is there a composer that hasn't written a piece for your instrument that you wish they had, living or from the past, you know? I mean, we've already said that Beethoven unfortunately didn't write a solo cello concerto, which would have been, I'm sure, lovely. But this triple, of course, is just a huge work for cello.
Mozart didn't write a cello concerto. Mozart.
That's right, Mozart too, right? You guys, oh man. I mean, I think as violinists, we are very lucky that most have written for violin quite extensively. I can't really think of anyone on top of my head right now that is a huge loss. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of posts like, what about this guy? What about this person? All that. But I really can't think of it. I mean, because the repertoire is so rich for the violin. I'll keep thinking about it as maybe Bob takes a turn.
Well, and really quick, Jennifer, am I right in saying that didn't Brahms consider writing a cello concerto, but once he heard Dvorak's, he decided to, what is that story?
I think that's exactly it. Actually, I think he was under the impression that a cello couldn't, like, the sound couldn't cut through for a concerto, which is always, it's a complicated thing. The range of the cello is really tucked into the orchestra so much, it's harder to make it cut through, right? So unless you're brilliant like Dvorak, who orchestrated it so perfectly, the cello is pretty much almost never covered. And I think once he heard that, he was like, well, gosh, he did it already. He was able to do that. But then when he wrote his double concerto, he made sure to orchestrate it very carefully. In the double concerto by Brahms, the cello always enters first, and then the violin joins in up higher later, and the orchestra comes in then too. So it's just really well done. And that way, I mean, you can do anything as long as you.
But kind of, it makes you wonder if Brahms would have known about this triple concerto. I have to believe he would have, but because the cello is always starting, and Beethoven's answer was just having you play very high. Am I right? I mean, he just went there with it.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I wish Bartók had written a cello concerto. I mean, he wrote the great viola concerto and two great violin concertos, right?
Yeah.
So
I know. See my predicament. I can't really come up with names.
I mean, there are others too. Prokofiev wrote one cello concerto, and I would like more. So
I can think of one offhand, which would be Mahler. Now, Mahler didn't write any concertos, but I always kind of thought I became such a huge Mahler fan at one point. I go on these rabbit hole. I spent a couple of years just completely embedded in a composer.
I mean, I left Mahler out because of he seems to require so much more to sort of say what he says. All the symphonies and stuff that I think maybe chamber music or even a concerto thing might have been maybe inadequate for him. to sort
Yeah.
of portray. I mean, Strauss has one, as we know. It's
Right.
not played very often, but that's part of the thing, right? Like we think of Strauss and Mahler as these giant orchestral composers, and there probably is a reason for that. There's so much that they add that with a concerto, it's a very different form, I think, to communicate.
But although you brought up Korngold, which he was a full, huge orchestral, right? I mean, he only wrote one symphony, but he wrote all of these film scores, and other than that, I really know.
So it could have been done.
Could have been done, yeah. And I think, of course, to your point, I mean, Korngold was really embedded in the chamber music area for most of his writing until he got into writing operas, and then he was off and doing another thing. But Bob, what do you have?
Well, it's interesting because what I might wish for, and this is going to circle us back to Beethoven, actually, is it's a really interesting fun fact that he only wrote one thing in the key of B major. It's the slow movement of the Emperor Piano Concerto. And that is one of the most glorious movements. It's one of my all-time favorite pieces ever. And I wish that he would have written more in the key of B major, because I don't know why he would have stayed away from that, if there was some reason that he didn't want to go there. So.
Isn't that's like one of his shortest movements too?
Yeah.
It's just
it's heaven.
I know. Absolutely. For just a brief moment, we see what heaven looks like, right? It's just
absolutely. And as an orchestral player, it's the same. I accompanied that probably more than a dozen times, and it is an incredible moment when you're in that concert hall when that second movement is going on. Absolutely. Of course, your arm is killing you.
Right.
You're like basically shaking because you're just holding these big long notes. Yeah. But it's a spectacular moment.
So for our audience, that's the Beethoven Fifth Piano Concerto. It's called the Emperor. If anybody wants to check it out, it's the second movement.
Right. Someone mentioned in their question when they were asking about other quotes that we might have heard from Beethoven, they heard the Emperor in this triple concerto, which is interesting. I mean, that slow movement has it's relatively short. Also in the triple, it's more of an introduction to the third movement. And it's, of course, it's glorious in its own.
What an amazing cello solo, isn't it?
Oh my gosh!
Wow.
Well,
the thing about the keys that I think is interesting, and I'll have to find this article again, but years ago we worked with the Beethoven Center in San Jose. So if you don't know about the Beethoven Center in San Jose, California, it has the largest collection of Beethoven memorabilia, first edition, scores, you name it, outside of Bonn, Germany. And it's in San Jose. And wonderful center. And I remember doing a performance there, and we were talking with the host of our performance, and we were given a sheet of where they were talking about each key and what it meant to composers at the time. Just like, there's a flower language. Carnations mean this, roses mean this, whatever. Keys at a certain point meant things. Like there was certain emotions associated with that, right? E flat is supposed to be the heroic key. So I wonder, I'll have to look up and see what B major meant.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a whole thing about that because there were composers that think in colors for keys centers, and I remember there being a story about some composers sitting in an audience and hearing a piece and saying, "This key doesn't work with the curtains here." It's like, wow, okay, that's really deep. Well, I can't thank you three enough. Wow, what a pleasure it is. It's so great to see you all again. I hope we can get together soon once, everybody has a vaccine. And I wish you all the best in your projects coming up. And I really hope that we can all make music again soon. But thank you so much. Thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. We're going to keep this up on the Waynesboro Symphony YouTube channel. So if you missed the performance, you can watch it again. And if you look in the comments section, there is a link to that encore that I mentioned of the slow movement from Mendelssohn's D minor piano trio that is absolutely sublime with all three of these soloists that played afterwards. Bob, Ertan, Jennifer, thank you so much. I'll give you all the last word if you wanted to say anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy holidays to everybody. Stay safe.
And come back when concerts are live again. Can't wait for that moment.
Yes. Okay. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good
Happy
night.
birthday, Beethoven.
Happy birthday.
Cheers.